David. You'll all notice a little red button pop up. I've started recording for the meeting. If anyone has difficulty joining the virtual meeting, please feel free to dial in over the phone using the information provided in the calendar item. It's also available on the MHCC website. If you run into technical difficulties, please feel free to contact me. We do ask that folks on the line mute their lines when they're not in use. If we do get a lot of background noise, we may mute your line from our end, but you can always unmute yourself. We do ask that everyone use the raise your hand function in Google. It looks like a little hand at the bottom of your screen. This will help us to facilitate discussion as we move along. If we do have anyone over the phone, we'll pause from time to time to ask for comments or questions from anyone joining us over the phone. And in the event that the meeting is breached, please hang up immediately. We will work on our end to send a new meeting link to everyone to minimize disruption as much as possible. So I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I will hand it back over to David now for any opening remarks.
Yeah, good. Great. Thank you, Alana. So what we try to do in the interest of time, everyone, is to not read the names or go around and have introductions. If you notice on your screen, in the lower right-hand corner, there's symbols of individuals. If you click on it, you can change the sort view to see everyone who's participating. What you probably know by now is that if you're dialing in, it does not show you the individual's name. So what I would ask, if you are dialing in, if you could just let me know who's on the phone via the telephone at this moment. I understand that Claudia Williams from the HSCRC is joined by phone. Who else is reaching out today via the telephone? And for those of you, here's you're muted. Okay. Let's keep moving along. Wanted to let you know that our executive director, everyone by now knows him well, Mr. Ben Steffen. I expect that he will do his best to join us today. If not, he always sends his regards, and we will look forward to briefing him after the event. So that said, let's jump right into it. Ava is working with us today to do the actual casting of the document, as well as doing some document entry as we move along. Ava, can you move us to the actual regulation, please? Okay. So, Alana, why don't you orient us to where we're beginning and what folks are seeing when they see the variation in colors, and then the purpose of the boxes on the right side for today.
Yep, absolutely. So we are starting off where we left off during our meeting in October. So we are about halfway through section 3. So that's the rights of the healthcare consumer. We will be picking up at, I believe it's 3D5, and the different colors that you see on the screen, there's a green track change. Those are recommended suggested edits from Post and Shell, our contractor who is making the recommendations for modernizing the regulations. You'll see red text boxes labeled MHCC to the right of the screen. Those are compiled edits from HIE Policy Board feedback and feedback that we got early on in this process. A little bit further on, you will see a blue either track change or comment bubbles labeled Policy Board feedback. Those are compiled edits that we've received from folks in writing since we distributed the document to everyone for feedback. So a few different perspectives there, but for the most part, compiled feedback from the policy board with track changes from Post and Shell in green. So As we go along, we will make additional track changes as needed and add comment bubbles reflecting further feedback from the group.
Okay. Alana, why don't you start by talking about the change that's been made to the revised 5, and let's see if we have comments here. Summarize and then review.
Okay, so we have an addition in the new subsection 5 where it states, so reading the full sentence, in the case of recurring disclosures to the same entity for the same purpose, a summary report may be provided by the HIE, and the addition being which includes information on how to request the underlying details of the summary report. So this is kind of a small technical change requesting an additional requirement to provide the summary report.
So, and just to reiterate, so this would be proposed by our contractor, the law firm of Post and Shell.
Correct.
Okay, so let's take a moment, see if there are any thoughts from the group. We won't poll if there's none be offered. We'll keep moving forward, and I'll troll for raised hands as we progress through the document. Okay, seeing none at the moment, we will continue to move on. Alana, as you're prepping the next point, I'll just make a reminder to the group that as we work through this today, please note that there are going to be other opportunities to comment on changes that are included or proposed in the document. This isn't your or our only opportunity. The review process has many layers. So if you leave the meeting today and think, shoot, I wish I had said, or I should have noted, there's opportunity to do that. So, don't feel bad if you decide to hold off or you think it's fine and they're at a time in the future you need to come back and add a change, proposed change, or make a comment. That's completely acceptable. Alana.
Okay, so moving along, maybe just kind of giving a bit more of an umbrella for the section that we're in here. So within this section, we're talking about how an HIE will comply to allow healthcare consumers to obtain information about the patient's PHI available through the HIE. So within that kind of discussion topic, we are within this section talking about what will be provided in written notices, and moving down to B2. So B states that the report shall specify the following, and we have a suggested deletion for this language that says, if such information is kept by the HIE in the ordinary course of business. So without it, this would just read the name of the participating organization to which the authorized user is affiliated.
Okay, and Alana and Ava, can you coordinate us to where we're looking again, please?
Yep, so I think Ava has it kind of highlighted at the top of the screen there.
Okay, so as Alana is bringing up points, Ava will indicate the section by highlighting them. Okay, thank you. Any comments here? And I think Pamela, good afternoon. Thank you for joining. Please share us your.
I guess I'm just curious as to why the deletion. I think it actually is a really good balance of, sort of the burden versus the benefit. I worry that you could have an HIE that may not always keep this in the ordinary course. And, what is the expectation for them to sort of go back and, if their normal reports don't contain this information, they're already giving the actual username. I wasn't sure what the thought was in deleting this.
Okay, let's see. We will note that. So I think what you're suggesting is that we maintain that particular entry in the document at the moment. Do others have concerns about if we retain this element of language? And I'm looking for raised hands and don't see any. So is there another hand? Sally Ann, good afternoon.
No, hi, good afternoon. No, I just agree with Pamela. I mean, I think it's an undue burden on the HIE.
Okay. So I think what we're hearing, unless there are others that are opposed to it, why don't we propose to hang on to the language that was struck? And if you can note that, Ava, to retain in your notes, that would be great. And we'll continue moving on. Oh, Kimberly, I think, has a comment. Kimberly, welcome. And you're on mute.
Sorry, I'd actually like to hear why it was proposed. I mean, there has to be a reason, and I'd rather have a better understanding of why it was deleted. I mean, from a consumer's perspective, obviously they would like to know. I mean, if they just find out it's, Joe Jones and they have no idea who Joe Jones is, and that information, I don't know. I mean, is this information that's generally kept in the ordinary court? I'd just like to have a better understanding of why it was proposed to be stricken so that I can sort of weigh the burden benefit myself.
Yeah, so we are only showing what's been added or proposed to be added or what's been proposed to delete. We are not able to include the rationale. What we would ask at this stage, what we would ask for is the group to consider the changes on the merit of which they appear. And if there's a question that you have, such as this one, where you'd like some background information on, we can take it offline and work with our contractors to get a better understanding for you.
That's what I'm proposing, as opposed to just saying you haven't heard from anyone other than two people saying, leave it in, right? So just like to have a little bit more information.
Yeah, no worries. We will follow up, and Ava, if you can mark this as a follow up for us to get back to the group, particularly Kimberly, that would be great. And we'll seek to get you more information here. Okay, I think it's safe to travel along, Alana.
Okay, so skipping one sub item here, we have an addition with language to include, the full sentence would read, the type of PHI disclosed if known by the HIE. If the type of PHI is unknown to the HIE will make reasonable efforts to determine the type of PHI disclosed. So I think just adding a layer of detail for the requirement here.
Okay, comments, reactions here?
This is Sally. Sorry,
Sure.
raising my hand. Sorry. And maybe Kimberly can answer this. Is there a standard for reasonable efforts? Because that sounds subjective to me. So what's reasonable to me may not be reasonable to Alana, let's say.
Okay.
And again, I'm just looking at, I think it's important for the HIE to be responsive, but I also think we have to acknowledge that we don't want a lot of the effort going into almost to have an investigative division.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I would invite Kimberly to respond, and then either Craig or Adrian to follow up. Kimberly, any thoughts here?
Well, I'm not going to opine on a legal standard because that's not my role here. That would have to come from the attorney for the agency. But I guess I'm just sort of trying to understand how this works in real life practice. I mean, presumably, if there's a disclosure and something's disclosed, and you're describing the disclosures, how are you not detailing the type of PHI disclosed if you're detailing what's disclosed? I know that sounds very circular, but I'm not sure how it isn't encompassed within describing the type of PHI. I mean,
yeah, no, I think you're making a good point. Craig or Adrian, any reaction here, any comment?
Sure. I don't recall if type is defined, but so a real life example, if it's helpful, would be if someone is in our secure page and they go to a patient they're not supposed to go to. Our secure page would have lab data and radiology images and ADT feeds and care team information. And so we could certainly say kind of the fact that clinical data was inappropriately accessed. We would know if it was PDMP. We would know if someone viewed some other tab within the application, but we probably couldn't know kind of with reasonable effort the specific type of clinical data.
But you would be able to define what would have been on that page, right?
Correct. We could give an example of the information that could have been accessible. Yeah.
So, but isn't this really talking about the effort here? It says the type of PHI disclosed. And then if you sort of jump down to the next comma, the HIE will make reasonable efforts to determine the type of PHI that was disclosed. So, I mean, the assumption might, maybe this isn't needed anyway. I can't tell yet, because it says the type of PHI is disclosed. And if you're you would make a reasonable effort anyway. So it may be that we're overthinking it and that we don't need the addition, or we only need that it says the type of PHI disclosed, comma, the HIE will make reasonable efforts to determine, what was the type that was disclosed. Something where, or we just say, maybe we start with the HIE will make reasonable efforts to identify the type of PHI disclosed, and just end it like that and just leave it like that.
That's probably less confusing. I think if the type of PHI is known to the HIE, I think that's what's confusing it, because it sounds like they have the potential to know more.
Right. So, Abel, what?
They don't know it, but they should know it. That's what I was getting after. If the type is unknown, then they're going to go digging for. Then they're going to have to go digging for stuff, researching, trying to find it. So no, I think your suggestion makes it clearer.
So it would read, the HIE will make reasonable efforts to determine the type of PHI disclosed. And I think that's what we would suggest here. Let's see what others think. Clay, your reaction. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm stumbling on the type as well, and don't know if that's a defined term, but what if we just remove type of from the sentence? Make a reasonable effort to determine the PHI disclosed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually better. It's actually good.
Right.
Reasonable effort to determine the PHI disclosed. Yeah, I mean, that would include type. Or Pamela, what do you think?
I mean, I don't disagree, but you're expanding it significantly. So the idea would be that I think under normal circumstances, you give a report saying we disclosed your encounter information from, these dates to these dates. I think if you take away type, then what you're doing is you actually have to give them the PHI that you've disclosed, which could result, that's like it's almost like giving them a copy of their record. So I think the type actually allows for an abridged description as opposed to the actual PHI.
Right. That may.
So how about instead of type, I don't know if scope is a better word than type, or nature,
Or even description or something.
Well, really, what
why
you're
not?
talking about is that the HIE will provide, will disclose, will provide the information that they have, right? That was breached.
So I think the concern, that if I understood Pamela, is not wanting to be obligated to provide the actual content. So which encounters, but to say, maybe the elements of PHI disclosed. So your social security number, procedure codes, diagnosis codes, clinical notes. but not the actual content.
Yeah.
Can we say the category of PHI disclosed?
What do you think of category?
With the
When I hear
parentheses.
category, I think of things like type 2 and
Okay.
others. Elements to me is more of a data dictionary kind of description.
Right.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't hear your say elements. You broke up. Must have broken up. Clay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the element. Good.
And this is information back to the consumers, so we want to be mindful of that.
Yeah, some people are breaking up.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think we have a collection of thoughts here. Let's continue forward, and we can evaluate this offline. But I think we have a good sense of what the group is aiming for. Okay.
Hey,
Alana?
David, this is Rob Horst. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Please proceed. Good afternoon.
So, yeah, sorry, I don't have the document in front of me, but I mean, I guess I wonder, like, why wouldn't we just be following, you know, HIPAA and pointing back to that? Because I mean, HIEs. Are you saying that they would have to report back to the consumer? Like it would really be the source, the covered entity that has to report back to consumer that their data had been disclosed, not the HIE. I don't mean to overcomplicate it, but like there are, you know, there are very clear rules in place for that kind of thing.
So I wanted,
why would
Rob,
we,
I just want to,
yeah.
I just want to, sorry to interrupt. I just want to caution you that these regulations don't, one might say we could just point to HIPAA for everything, but please keep in mind that the origins and the basis of these regulations was to have some nuances that are unique and in many ways raise the bar of HIPAA. So we don't want to just say, well, we should just follow HIPAA, because just by and large, one can make that kind of sort of blanket generalization throughout the entire regulations. And that's really not the premise of what we're aiming for here.
And David,
Got it. Okay.
I would also add that, so this section is specifically talking about what would happen if a healthcare consumer requests information about their PHI, and this specific area talking about a summary report that would be made available upon request by the consumer.
That's correct. So Adrian, or sorry, Kimberly, your point?
Yeah, and I've heard some comments about breach. So this isn't the breach section, right?
No, it's not. It is not.
Where the consumer is saying, I'd like to know who's accessed my data through the HIE. And
That's correct.
This is saying you provide them with who accessed it, the date and time of the disclosure, and what was accessed. And so we've now changed what was accessed to they'll make a reasonable effort to determine what was disclosed, which doesn't make sense. I mean, we're describing the type of PHI disclosed, or, I mean, that's what it is. So, and okay, it doesn't say send them all the PHI that was disclosed. It says what was disclosed. So I'm not sure why we're changing it to something other than what it should be, which is what was disclosed. Describe elements, okay, but it's not a reasonable effort to determine it. It is tell the patient what was disclosed.
So I agreed. So Craig, do you want to weigh in here? Because or Pamela, I thought there was some notion about, in some cases, it might just be a reasonable effort, because there might not be anything that they can readily disclose or easily disclose. Pamela, can you weigh in on that, and then perhaps Craig can as well?
Well, I don't want to. I mean, Craig knows this better than I do. He's more in the weeds, but I think a description of the type of PHI, I think, is kind of the right standard. Again, we're not looking for them to actually share the actual PHI that was, it's the same kind of standard that we use in a lot of contexts like breach. I'm just using it as an analogy. I know that we're not talking here, but we don't typically like give the patient the PHI that was breached or was disclosed. We give them a description of it so that it can, be a little bit higher level of, again, the date of the encounter, lab results, notes, whatever. It's a description of what was disclosed, not the actual PHI that was disclosed.
So you prefer, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, to read the HIE will make reasonable efforts to provide a description of what was disclosed.
Yeah, a description of the type. I mean, that's the term that's used in breach notification if we want to be consistent. I mean, just the description of the type. I would defer to Craig, but I tend to, and I hope I don't get myself in trouble here with Craig, but I tend to agree with Kimberly that I think you should be able to say what type of PHI was disclosed. I don't think I don't think there's a challenge there. And so again, the idea of I would like to understand if that really is a challenge for HIEs, but it seems like a reasonable ask.
Craig, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I mean, I can't speak for all HIEs. In our case, what we do is disclose whether or not it's been, the type of data is PDMP or clinical, or if there's some other category of data. I'm not even sure what a different category of data would be. So we try to describe the type. We can't go deeper into the clinical data and say lab versus discharge summary.
Okay. So I think we have several hands. So let's start with those I noticed first. Clay, then Adrian, and then Louise.
I'm sorry, David, that was a holdover from my previous comment. Sorry about that.
No worries. Adrian, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of reiterate what Craig just said. So we give a kind of broad description when we tell people they've accessed clinical data. We could certainly, and it's available on our website, what clinical data might include, but we don't have any way to know that somebody saw a lab versus seeing a radiology, right? They may have seen whatever is on that page when the page was displayed to them, or they might not have. I have no way of knowing where their eyes went because it's the page. They don't necessarily have to click in to all of that information. And so I also just wanted to point out that this is the AOD section, right? So this is the accounting of disclosures section. It's not the PHI section. And so we have different standards for identity validation. So we do need to kind of be careful. I like where we're going with the description of the PHI because we don't have the same level of identity validation for providing people actually their PHI. We try to make it pretty easy for people to get an accounting of disclosures because it doesn't include PHI. So I think we need to be careful about getting too granular about what we're going to give patients about what was disclosed.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, this is all under Section 03, which is rights of a healthcare consumer concerning information accessed, used, or disclosed through an HIE. Okay, thank you, Adrian. Louise.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how this would actually work for, EHR, because, as I said before, all that data belongs to the provider. And if there's ever an issue, we have no direct relationship with the patient whatsoever. And patients, generally go to their provider if there's an issue, and we would communicate with the provider and the provider would communicate with the patient. So I'm not sure how this would work for us. I mean, we don't really have any rights to.
Yeah, so what I would say for the scenario you've just painted is that I would prefer that we have a sidebar conversation and not look at it as in the examination of the draft changes. And I say that because EHR vendors that have HIE components are all different. And it's hard to just sort of answer that question and say, well, it applies to every EHR vendor that has an HIE utility. So we would welcome the opportunity to follow up with you offline, I guess I would say. Hopefully that will help.
Is there like a way to arrange a conversation or?
So what we'll do is reach out to you following the call here today and see if we can set up some time.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
You bet. So, okay, I think we've pretty much talked about this enough, unless there's any trailing comments that somebody wants to make at this stage. Okay, Alana.
Okay, so the next edit we have is just that, a simple edit for PHI. Moving down to, we have a small edit regarding the federal regulations, and this is in regards to how an HIE will respond to written requests by a consumer about that same accounting of disclosures report. So we've essentially shortened the time frame for the response time for an HIE to respond to a request, and included the specification for a request by mail.
Okay, so it may be too constrained, but let's hear what others think. Pamela.
So I think some of it depends on how everything else flushes out, because 3 days is really, really short amount of time, and like in real time. I mean, by the time you receive something, you've got other things going on. And so the question is, I mean, obviously this is not the primary focus of the HIE. And if there are other things they have to research and go back and create reports that have other information that isn't kind of readily available in a report, then I think 3 days is a little aggressive.
Yeah, and I guess I would ask the group, is there, if we think there's that 30 days is too broad, is there a way to sort of present the wording in a way, in a manner that doesn't really assign a specific day, but really keeps it focused on what might be reasonable given the request? Is there a way, is that too vague? What do you all think? I think Craig is making a point. 3 days is too short. Yeah, I think that's probably correct.
I wonder if you said no later than 30 days, maybe that gives some flexibility to HIEs or whomever to respond, and they have up to 30 days.
Good point. Let's see, Sally Ann, as you weigh in, can you also share thoughts related to what Luigi just proposed? And see if you're muted.
Sorry. Luigi's suggestion is, I think, a reasonable one. This goes back to my previous question, where we have, reasonable notice or reasonable time frame. I didn't mean to ask Kimberly for a legal opinion, but is there something that, that's generally acceptable as reasonable? And like no longer than 30 days is I guess is fine. I also found the language confusing, because you went from 3 business days and with some language, and then within 10 days. So if it's by mail. So I think, the broader we can have it and the less confusing we can make it.
What if the HIE shall respond as soon as practicable, but no later than 30 days? So there's an expectation that you're going to work as quickly as you can. So it's not just a reasonable time frame; it's that you're working quickly, but 30 days is your latest.
Right. And I like the word practicable, because that it's more affirmative in terms of putting a parameter around it. It defines it better. What is practical for the HIE to do, given all the other things it has to do?
Yeah, I think that's good. Anyone have any second thoughts about the approach that we just presented? Okay, not hearing any. I think, Ada, if you can note that as a change to the section in the draft, that would be good. And I think, actually, Kim, your thoughts?
Sorry, David, and I just go back to, you obviously have someone who's your contractor has made the suggestion. I would assume there's a reason for the suggestion. I mean, HIPAA has, I think my recollection from HIPAA is it's 60 days, but there may be, and I am not as up to date on the newest transparency rules, that may have shortened that time frame in another reg. So, I mean, I think obviously you're going to go back to your contractor. I just want to make sure you aren't.
Yeah, so what we'll do, so Kimberly,
I'm fine with it the practical 30 days. I mean, I think that's a reasonable suggestion, but there may be some reason why.
Yeah, just to remind everyone, that's a great point. Let me take this opportunity that because there's so many layers of review, if we propose a change such as what's being proposed now, it will go under review again, both from our contractor and from our own, from our internal staff and from our assistant attorney general. So there's lots of layers of review. So we take it on faith, if you will, that every change we're proposing will go through that same kind of review structure. It won't just be, oh, you know, we made this change and it's good to go and we're finished. And you see it in a proposed rule, or proposed regulation. So you won't see it that way. But yes, there'll be lots of layers of discussion. So thank you for calling that to my attention, and I'm hopeful that helps a little bit. So let's continue on, Alana.
Okay, so we have an addition with the next paragraph or sentence that speaks specifically to information blocking. So an HIE or participating organization shall not engage in any practice that constitutes information blocking, with some specifics there.
Okay, I think we have a couple hands. So Pamela, your thoughts?
And I promise this is my last comment for a while. I would remove or participating organization. I think that expands the scope of the authority for this regulation. You're regulating HIEs. I don't think you should be regulating participating organizations.
Okay, other reactions to what's here or the comment that Pamela's made? Okay, and same rule, we will, again, multiple layers of review we'll make to what's here and what's being discussed today in terms of proposed changes. All right, Alana, please continue.
So the next edit, we have a simple, again, shortening protected health information to PHI, but then we've also added language. So an HIE will take affirmative steps to protect a patient's PHI, including sensitive health information, and adding financial information to this sentence.
Yeah, okay. Reactions here to adding financial? Would seem reasonable. Do we need it? And Craig, before you weigh in, do we need to make it clear that HIEs? So I don't know if now I'm having second thoughts because HIEs do not have financial information. But Craig, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I was going to say that. Like, it seems like an odd thing to call out. I'm not sure we have any financial information.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What do others think? Because Luigi, your thoughts about the financial information?
Well, I mean, well, not an HIE, but I don't know if there's a rule that prevents an HIE from getting financial information, although, or providing that as a service line, although most HIEs, at least, and certainly in this region, CRISP as the dominant HIE probably does not, and others that I've seen do not, but I don't know if there's a law that prevents HIEs from obtaining financial data from an EHR. So I don't understand the context of why it's in there, but I don't know if there's something that prevents that from being a service that an HIE adds.
Okay. Go ahead, Sally.
David, I think there is a potential, as Luigi said, if you're running an EMR as an HIE, there's the potential for it. I don't think, I'd be surprised if CRISP had it, but I think some of the smaller HIEs might.
Okay, thank you. Mike and then Kimberly.
Chip did.
Yeah, David, hey, Mike Dennis and I have joined. Sorry, I joined a little late.
No
I
worries.
guess
Good afternoon.
I didn't have any comment on the financial. I think there's been good discussion there. I guess my comment was more on this following sentence after the comma that says that is accessible to or through the HIE from a breach. That seems a little interesting that the information is accessible through a breach, but is that appropriate to have? Obviously, to protect it from a, I guess maybe they mean from a breach occurrence. I guess I was just struggling with that, from a breach.
Yeah, I think you're suggesting maybe the word from a breach occurrence, but let's pause on that and come right back to it, so we won't lose that thought. Kimberly, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with the way the sentence is structured as well. So, and it may well be the HIE has, independent of the PHI it obtains from participating organizations, its own information about the patient. So if the patient is seeking that disclosure, then you would have that patient's email or address within the system. To the extent that certain HIEs, not this one, charges to provide information, then you would have presumably financial information to pay for that information. So I could see it being sort of independent of the PHI, right? And PHI includes sensitive health information, that goes without saying, right? So I'm just wondering if we're trying to get to the patient's personal information and financial information independent of what's included in the medical record.
I mean, that's an interesting point. Let's note that, Ava, because to some extent, I mean, it's just really stating what the expectation is of the HIE. It's just, an HIE shall and speaks to the expectation, and taking steps to protect patient information, both sensitive and financial, is really what it's noting. I think Mike brings a good point upon the structure of the sentence, which is from a breach occurrence. It's probably something about breach could be helpful to smooth it out, but I don't know that. We may need to take this line and figure it out, because Sally Ann, help us clear this up.
I would just stop at "and financial information," period.
Yeah, I agree with that.
An affirmative statement, simple affirmative statement. But
Yeah, that makes sense.
Although Kimberly looks a bit pensive, so.
No, I'm thinking in terms of bigger, like, do we say they should also take steps to protect the patient's personal identifying information, which of course is probably not defined here, but it is defined in state law as a way to get in, other information that might be included in the HIE that goes beyond PHI.
Well, how would you propose? That makes sense. Can you help us with a little bit of wording, even though it's not going to be perfect? But so maybe you could think about how that might appear, and then Adrian will come back to you in a moment. So if it says an HIE shall take affirmative steps to protect a patient's blank, and Adrian, while Kimberly looking it up, why don't you weigh in? You had a point.
I was just agreeing with Kim. I think that it potentially makes sense to protect financial information and other, PII, as the HIEs already have to do, complying with other state laws that affect them. But the way this sentence is worded, it seems like it's saying PHI includes sensitive health and financial information, and that's not accurate with the definitions, right? So to Kim's point, PHI definitely includes sensitive health information, but I don't know that in the definitions it includes financial information. So maybe the sentence just needs to be restructured to say PHI and PII. which would include financial information. I don't know. I don't want to, spend too much time wordsmithing, but I get where the point is trying to go, but I think the sentence, adding it just to the end of the clause, makes it seem like we're trying to now say that financial information is PHI.
Yeah, and Catherine, good afternoon. Then I think we should raise Clay's point, because perhaps Clay's noting we should just stop earlier, and maybe that would resolve it. Catherine, you're good at this. Tell us what we should do.
Well, really, Clay has just read my mind, because I think the idea is we're simply trying to be inclusive of all patient data, period. Are there any categories of data that we think the HIE shall not take affirmative steps to protect? No. So I think Clay's point is spot on.
Okay, and I think I saw Pamela agreeing. But
I was going to say you might want to keep the qualifier just so you understand this, because you're talking about patient information, which is so broad. You might want to say an HIE shall take affirmative steps to protect a patient's information that is accessible to or through the HIE, period.
Yeah.
Ava, can you capture that for us and show that change? And then let's see I'd be interested to see what Kimberly thinks once you get it loaded in there.
It's sounded good as it was coming out of Pamela's mouth.
So it reads, an HIE shall take affirmative steps to protect the patient's information that is accessible to or through the HIE. Okay, and Michelle, do you want to weigh in? It sounds like you have, Michelle, tell us a little bit more about what you're thinking.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Apologies for being late. I know certainly for Cerner, we are trained in our annual HIPAA training and privacy and security training, that HIPAA does include particular financial information. But that is the training that we receive. Certainly, I'm not going to try to pretend to be legal counsel here. And so what I was wondering is the intention here to cover transactional information and or things like the financial identifier, payer plan details, beneficiary numbers, those sort of things. Because I think from a billing, the billing and transactional stuff where you're seeing dollar amounts is slightly different from the other stuff that I just mentioned. Maybe we don't need to split hairs here if we intend to cover all the things, but because I'm not clear, I wondered if anyone else was wondering if that was ambiguous.
So it strikes me that this is all the above, because it says an HIE shall take affirmative steps to protect a patient's information that is accessible to or through an HIE. So if it's transaction, if it's financial, if it's PHII, if it's PHI. So I think it covers all the above.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Great question. So let's travel along a little bit, and if there are any other thoughts, we'll pick them up as we go further down and come back. So Alana.
Okay, so as an addition to how an HIE would protect a patient's information, we've included a couple of sentences about protecting information via taking robust cybersecurity measures consistent with best practices to protect information from cyber attacks. Also to include but not be limited to annual privacy and security training, as well as designating an information security officer and outlining the roles there.
So are we detailed here? I guess that's a question back to the group. Do we need this level of depth, if you will? Any reactions from anyone?
It feels very prescriptive, particularly in the end where we talk about what the roles of the security officer should be by the HIE. It feels like we're getting into a lot of detail in prescribing, what the scope of service should be, or for that security officer.
Mm-hmm. So Clay, what are your thoughts? Okay. So, Mike, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I guess, again, the requirement for annual training and the requirement for an information security officer be assigned, those are all defined under HIPAA. So maybe there could be a citation to those regulations.
So I would venture to say that what I'm hearing is it feels like to some that it's too prescriptive. I'm wondering, Kimberly, you think this is where we should be headed?
I think this is pretty baseline stuff, but I haven't pulled. It may be reiterating what HIPAA requires. I don't have it in front of me, but I mean, we know the general premise behind all of these, as I recall at the beginning of this thing, I hope somewhere, is HIPAA is always the floor, right? So I mean, I think, but without pulling it up, I can't tell you.
Okay. So Sally Ann, then Matt.
I just typed my comment.
So it's
badly. I just said, instead of best practices, I would use industry standards. Suggest industry standards, and I would suggest ending the paragraph after cyber attacks, line 2 after cyber attacks. And I like the suggestion that if there is a citation, use it as the reference point.
Okay. So other reactions to that approach? I think we're hearing Catherine agrees. Okay. So I don't see anyone with a dissenting view at this moment. So we will capture that in the comments. I think we can propose these particular edits that you all have suggested. Okay, Alana, let's travel along.
Okay, so in the next edit, we are adding the word secure along with accessible and convenient to the method by which a person would notify an HIE about a potential or actual breach or non-HIPAA violation.
Okay. Comments, reaction here? Pamela.
And I'm sorry, I can't remember if how person is defined. Is this supposed to be anybody? Like, is it like a consumer even? Like, my only concern is that, does that mean that the HIEs have like a portal? Because if I send from my personal email, that's not secure, but that's not on the HIE. Like if the HIE provides an email address to notify them, it might be secure on their end, but it's not necessarily a secure method because it could be coming from a personal email account. That's all.
So what you're saying is, said differently, we could be eliminating the possibility of using just general email for someone to for a consumer to interact with the HIE.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Craig, what are your thoughts about that?
I agree. I mean, it seems somewhat unnecessary, or to Pamela's point, like you'd be limiting the ways in which people could raise concerns.
And I think Robin Elliott is on the call. So from the consumer hat, your perspective on this? Okay, we can come back to Robin. How about let me just bring in Adrian and then Luigi. Adrian, your thoughts from the consumer hat?
Yeah, I agree with Pamela. I think by having the secure, you limit the emails that we currently get we have a patient feedback email at CRISP, but I can't control what people use to send me that email. And I would hate for those emails to not get through because we can't possibly set up secure emails for everyone or verify that they are before they send an email to that box.
Yeah, I hear you. Good point. Luigi.
Yeah, I was just gonna, isn't there already language that speaks to how patients can opt out to an HIE, and there are multiple ways they could do it, which is
That's correct.
convenient, secure for them. Couldn't this be similar to that? I mean, we're really talking about, you know, convenient access, but there's already sort of specificity in terms of ways that an HIE needs to make information, an opt-out process available to a consumer. Oops, sorry.
Okay, let us check that. But I have a feeling the opt-out is more prescriptive because it's an opt-out, whereas what we're talking about here is just the ease and accessibility. And the opt-out is going to have some more definitive steps because it's a process. And here we're just talking about, you know, an onboard ramp, if you will, of sorts. Clay is making a point, and that do you want to mention that to the group?
Yeah, so I was just thinking that I didn't read this as excluding using email. I read it as the HIE must provide a secure way of doing it, but if a person makes a choice to expose their PHI by putting it in unsecure email, I don't think this precludes that as a channel. But I also don't have a strong preference around this. But I viewed it as being inclusive of other methods.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Clay. Kimberly, and then Pamela.
Yeah, I mean, I think as worded, I think it could be limiting, and I don't like that. So to Clay's point, perhaps it could say, shall have an easily accessible and convenient method, including a secure option by which a person can notify the HIE. That way, if they want to file a complaint on an online portal, make a phone call.
There you go. That's a good point. Very good. Pamela, that's really a good point. So we're capturing that in the box. And Ava, if you want to just note the change in two, so we can go back to it. Pamela, your thoughts?
I actually completely agree. It was similar. I was going to say something similar, although she said it better, which is to make it, just switch it so that it's not limiting and that it makes it clear.
Yeah, good point. Yes, I think that once we have some voices of consent, we have the voice of consensus amongst most. Let's go on. Alana?
Okay, so when an HIE is notified about a breach or non-HIPAA violation, we've added a sentence here that the HIE will evaluate current privacy and security measures and information processes and make modifications where necessary to prevent further breaches.
Okay. Reaction here? Cillian, and then Craig.
I mean, this seems like it's part of the ordinary HIE protocol. I mean, isn't that, I really leave that to Craig. Isn't that just something you would do on a continuous improvement process?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't mind specifying it. I would just say we might want to soften it. Like, no one can do everything necessary to prevent breaches, or else we would. And so I would soften it with industry best practices or something similar.
Yeah. So let's. We're almost saying, is it really needed? Does it do anything? I guess the question is, if we're just restating it to state it, but it doesn't really do anything new or different, I don't know that we want to go on too much. And so let's go with Pamela, then Michael, then Catherine, or Michelle, then Catherine. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, this is the part that's required by HIPAA. If you're a business associate and you have a breach, you're supposed to, evaluate your practices and sort of make sure you do mitigation to make sure it doesn't happen again. I agree with Craig that the language here is a little too harsh. I mean, I don't object to the concept of putting it in here because it is an obligation anyway. I just don't think it's necessary. But I do think if we do add the language, we just need to soften it a hair.
So Pamela, did you say you're not sure you think it's necessary?
I don't think it's necessary, only because I think that's part of the business associate agreement and being a business associate.
Yeah, I would conclude the same thing, and I would just ask the group as you're thinking about it, if it doesn't add additional value because it requires something that seems to make sense, then reiterating what already exists may not be the best approach. So Catherine, then Michelle.
Yeah, my comment really, David, was just pointing out the fact that I know we're supposed to be treating each of these statements, at face value. However, the last few items all had language that perhaps were a little overstating, restating sort of existing protocols, but it almost feels like some of those edits were inserted by someone who was wearing a consumer hat, because as a consumer, I do like seeing the word secure, right, associated with my ability to interact. And I probably do like to see that somebody even has a security officer. And I probably do like to see that they're going to evaluate, an improved process if there, were an issue. So I think maybe that's perhaps why we're seeing some of this language. That said, I think it's a philosophical question for do we need to do that or not, for consumer plain language. I certainly agree with the comments that this is a little bit redundant, for all of us in terms of what we know is prescribed by law and operational process, I guess.
Okay, excellent point. Let's get a couple more comments and then we'll note it for potential striking. Michelle, then Clay.
Yes, agree with the others. I think saying that the evaluation is a bit redundant. However, I think it's important to reflect that there would be modifications where needed from a mitigation perspective. So if there are if something happens from a breach perspective, it's because something wasn't working in an ideal state, and sometimes that can be remedied. Sometimes it can't be avoided in the future, but I think that should be a part of a response to an incident or a breach. Just in terms of saying this happened, we looked at you for an individual incident, reflecting this is what happened, this is why it happened, here's our response, i.e. we're going to take these steps to make sure to help mitigate it happening again, or conversely, it could be this is outside of our control, there's nothing that we can do to mitigate it.
So I'm wondering if maybe we should note this and come back to it when we get to the breach section, because this section is focused on rights of healthcare consumers. And if we think we need to keep this, then I wonder if we should look for placement where it might be more appropriate in the regulations. But a number of commenters so far have said maybe we should eliminate it. Clay, why don't you share with us your thoughts, but also weigh in on what we've just said?
So I agree with you, David. This probably belongs in a different section. But to your point about this being healthcare consumers, it raised a question in my mind: is who can notify the HIE of a potential issue? Is that every consumer, or is that only a participating organization? If it is every consumer, then I don't know that I would agree with in the acknowledgement of receiving that within a business day, because you could have a legitimate issue and you could have a large number of people notifying you about it. You could also have a large number of things that are not real issues reported to you. So if the intent is that the notification comes from a participating organization, that's fine, but I think we should be clear there. If it includes end consumers, I don't know that that's appropriate.
Mm-hmm. That is, as we step back through it, does it really fit? HIE, when an HIE is notified in writing of a potential or actual breach or non-HIPAA violation, the HIE shall and acknowledge the receipt in an investigation in accordance with 08, providing the notification, evaluate current privacy and security measures and information policy, and make modifications when necessary to prevent further breaches. Okay, we may have to just move this and come back to it. Is there any other thoughts here, Sally Ann? And then we'll.
No, just back to, I just don't think we need it, or unless it's not addressed in the other in another section around security. I'm you. I don't know why my name isn't coming up on the chat, but anyway, I just said I think we should eliminate it.
Okay. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw another thought out there. I mean, I see it as sort of filling in what sort of looks like a missing piece, right? It says if an HIE is notified, they'll acknowledge receipt, they'll begin an investigation, they'll notify people of the outcome. But what sort of seems to be missing is, oh, and by the way, they'll take a look at what went wrong and take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again to the extent that they can. I mean, it just feels like it's filling in a missing piece. And to the extent that it's practiced anyway, I think it helps to have it here. And I don't think I'm not sure. I think Clay thought it should be softened. I'm not sure how you would soften it. I mean, if you're evaluating it, you're making modifications where necessary. I mean, that feels very, very soft language to me, but.
Yeah, I don't think it should be softened. I think it just belongs in the breach section of the document. And maybe we reference that you follow the steps as outlined in whatever that section is.
Okay, so that's 08.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we, Ava, if you just put a note for us to look at perhaps inserting this into 08, I think that would, it's the inclusion of the intent, and it is it in an area that's specifically geared at breaches. Okay, a couple of comments I saw bouncing back and forth. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up at this point? Anything additional?
David, just going back to my earlier comment, if in C it says provide the person filing the notification, if that again is back to individual people in the community, I think that's overly burdensome, and I don't know that it's also appropriate. If it's participating organizations, I think it's appropriate. I don't think you're certainly not at any level of detail would you want to describe remediation and mitigation efforts to the general public.
Right.
Yeah, David, this is Rob Horst. I do agree with that too. It's so good. I'm trying to picture a scenario in which a consumer would contact an HIE, and I do think it could be burdensome as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're underscoring the rationale for its value, but the placement of it may not be appropriate as it appears here. Okay. All right, we will capture that sentiment, and actually, I think Ava, we're talking about. I think it's D that what we're saying is that would be placed someplace else, not be like D, David.
Well, I think it's in C, we obligate the HIE to respond to every person who's filed a notice with a detailed report.
That's
which I
right.
think is inappropriate. So
just notifying them there's been a breach? I'm sorry. Now you've lost me. I understood where you would want to provide each individual with a detailed, all the detail that the HIE is undertaking in D. But are you now saying something different about C?
Well, C says that in accordance with the regulation 08, provide the person filing the notification and each healthcare consumer and whose PHI was breached with information concerning the determination and resolution. So yes, there should be there's an open question as to whether it's the covered entity that does the notification or the HIE, but that aside, just being clear that if the general public is included in people that can file the notification of the incident, that you wouldn't want to obligate the HIE to responding in writing to every person who made the notification. And you certainly wouldn't want them to, I don't think, to provide them with the resolution of the matter, other than in a very general sense. I think you have to create a differentiation between the people who file the notification and the people impacted. People impacted should be made aware of what was impacted. How things were resolved, if that is a technical explanation, should be closely held to only certain recipients, because you wouldn't want to share that. I just think we need to get clear on the intent here, and whether we're allowing individuals to notify or participating organizations or a combination of both, and who gets what responses from that notification and what constitutes a response.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you. Any reaction? I think Catherine has a written comment. Catherine, please proceed.
Yeah, thanks, David. I was just going to say, I'm understanding Clay's perspective. We need to make sure that we're looking at the 08 reg to make sure that we're not contradicting anything there. It's difficult for me to recall what that states. So we may be opening a Pandora's box that requires us to look in both spots on that.
Yeah, that's probably where we should leave it. We need to do a cross check here and get a sense for how much, what the impact of change here would be there, and what's there does it need a lot of change from what's here. So I think I hear your point. That's a good one. Sally Ann, final thoughts on this one?
No. Thank you.
One way to go. Clay, is this new, or you were? I think your hand.
No, sir. I didn't put my hand down. Sorry.
No worries. Let's let Mike have the last thought here. Mike, please proceed.
Hey, David. I guess I asked a question in the chat and wanted to point that out, but wanted to make sure that if we're using the words non-HIPAA violation, does the policy define that term, and what do we mean by it? The other thing that,
just to point out, we do define non-HIPAA in the definition.
And the other thing to point out, someone had said that HIPAA is the floor, and HIPAA privacy and security is applicable to covered entities. That being health plans, clearinghouses, and providers. HIE, I don't know that would fall under that definition of covered entity, and therefore this state policy should reflect it where it should, where the state wants to. It should
Okay, Mike, you broke up there at the last few
so
moments.
that it's not so that the floor is established.
Mike, we lost probably the last 7 seconds. Can you just restate that trailing thought?
I guess I was saying that if the state is trying to direct HIPAA policy or regulation on the HIE, it should explicitly do so in this document, because the HIE may not be considered a covered entity under HIPAA because it's not a health plan or a clearinghouse or a provider.
Right, it's a business associate to them. So
that's right. So I think that the policy should define and cite HIPAA where the state believes it needs to do so, so that it establishes the floor.
Yeah, good comment. Ava, please note that in the comment box. I think we want to come back to that. All right, so Lana, please take us on to item next.
Okay, so the new section G regarding the consumer's ability to make an educated decision about opting out. There are a few minor edits that would kind of broaden their opt-out to HIE kind of as the verb, as opposed to opting out of an HIE organization.
Yeah, I think these are just words missing. I don't know that they present any challenges
Okay.
on the level. Let's go on.
So then subsection 3, within that, we have deleted this verbiage at the end, or where failure to disclose may constitute information blocking. That's a suggested edit from some written feedback we got from folks, being that the addition of that language might be interpreted as suggesting that information blocking rules trump or take precedent over patient privacy preferences.
Any concerns from anyone in the group here on this? Okay. Sally Ann, you and
No. I was just talking to myself. So it's fine.
okay, Alana.
Okay, in section H, regarding the consumer's communication with HIE about participation status, we've added a few methods there, by email, via a secure encrypted platform, by API. We've also included an online portal and just a minor edit specifying regular business hours instead of business hours.
Pamela, your thoughts?
So it's the same comment I made before. I struggle with how the HIE is supposed to provide a secure email platform to the consumer. The online portal makes perfect sense. Those kinds of things are things that I think the HIE can control the security of, but I don't know how an HIE can ensure the security of a consumer's email.
Yeah, good point. Adrian, your reaction?
Yep, just going to agree that it's not possible for us to potentially provide direct email for all consumers. And so you are limiting, you're essentially creating a limitation.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good point.
Agree.
So we'll note it. Catherine, any concerns about striking that?
I was still pondering that a little bit. Obviously, I don't think we can provide, secure email to everyone, but if the API is a secure mode, one secure mode, I would think is adequate.
Okay. Good.
I think you still want by email. I don't want to speak. I would think by email would be appropriate. I just think you can say by email.
Period. Right.
Yeah, not secure.
And I think, Rob, you had a thought.
Yeah, I think all these honestly could just be combined into one bullet, and you just say telephone, mail, or online. I don't, in person is also a stretch. Fax these days is a bit of a stretch. In person, certainly. I don't want consumers stopping by AI offices and saying they'd like to opt out of the HIE. It seems really weird. So I think we could just simplify this quite a bit. An API also, what does that mean? Is there going to be unless that's like a consumer app that somehow would connect into the HIE? But I don't think I guess that could be included. But it seems to me just telephone, mail, online, or via API. If the patient has a consumer application that allows that functionality, I would kind of limit it to that.
Yeah.
But Rob, wouldn't if it's the API, wouldn't that have to be through a plan or something like that? It wouldn't be direct to the HIE or direct to the consumer.
I agree, Sally. Sally, and I don't think that would.
Yeah.
I would honestly take out API. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adrian, I think Rob, Sally Ann make a good point. Your thoughts here?
Yeah, I agree. I think the point via API is related to there would need to be some sort of consumer interface on the other end in order for, and then the HIE could accept via the API that opt out. But an API by itself is not going to have a user interface. So I think maybe this just is in the wrong place. The consumer isn't essentially opting out via API. The HIE is kind of accepting opt-outs if they're able to be captured in another interface. I do agree that in person is kind of, even for CRISP, having, during the pandemic, especially, we don't have people in the office, and it's having someone there to accept opt-outs would be very difficult, as well as fax. So I think by adding the new option of having the online portal, you are essentially creating a lot more options for patients. And so it doesn't seem like a burden, but having an in-person and a fax option, even mail, I understand we're going to do mail, but fax and in-person do create an administrative and staffing burden for an HIE.
Listen, I think
it's really unlikely. I don't think anyone has ever opted out in person. Craig, you can correct me, but I
think it's also a safety issue.
Look, I think you guys just don't want us visiting these very plush offices of AI and CRISP. And now I think I'm feeling more than ever we should leave it in and encourage consumers to do it this way.
Even our staff doesn't want to come to the office right now, let alone others.
Yeah, see, David, that's our problem too. I mean, nobody's there.
Understood. I think you all make good points. Catherine, last thoughts here?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think E and F really potentially could be merged together. I think the spirit of sort of the API secure, right, was probably more intended to be portal, right? Some of our EHR, HIEs, if you will, would potentially have that as an option.
So we would say an online portal.
Yeah, merge E and F basically together.
Well, but when you say merge, Catherine, we don't want to, the recommendation I think has been to delete the API.
Yeah, meaning the technology that would be online via secure website or online portal under the covers actually has a secure API, making it right.
Right.
By
now
striking E, in effect F.
Yeah.
Assumes that functionality, and I also think the in-person, joking aside, right? I think the in-person is literally a leftover, right? Part of the modernization here that we are doing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I think Dr. Connor is she may have an opposing position. Dr. Connor, good afternoon. And you're muted. Okay. Dr. Connor, we can come back to you if you're able to unmute. We'll backtrack a little bit. Alana, please proceed.
Okay, so I think the feedback to item 2A will probably mirror many of the comments that we've just heard regarding specifying those methods. Edits to 2C, so when there is written communication about healthcare consumers opt-in or opt-out, we're making specifications about that written communication to be at a 6th grade reading level, sent within 5 days of telephone communication, and maybe sent in person or by mail, secure email, or fax.
So I think B, we have to change, given what we've said, online portal. Ava, if you could capture that so we don't miss it, because we were using online portal above. And then I think this I want to make sure is the written at the 6th grade reading comprehension level appropriate, and there's different views on that. So let's start with I don't know if Dr. Connor, you're able to free.
I'm here. I wanted to go back to what Catherine said. I'm just wondering if there's some kind of way we can't summarize the technology or have it be such that should there be a new technology that you might want to consider or use, you don't have to come back and modify this particular section. I like what Catherine has said early on, and that way you're not locked on to naming every single piece. And I do agree that we need to make sure that it's user friendly, and that they can, be able to read it, use it, etc. But I like what Catherine has said early on. I think we are spelling out stuff that's subject to change, and if we were to use a global or whatever the current thing is, you may not have to go back and readjust it or change it.
Yeah, excellent point. We'll make a note, because I don't know that we know that, but there's a lot of smart people here and elsewhere that can help us craft some kind of statement would meet, Dr. Connor, the basis of the spirit of what you just noted. That's a very good point. Thank you. Adrian, then Pamela.
So I actually, I'm glad that Dr. Conner got to go before me because I was also going to take us back up there with a similar suggestion that if we could be, and I understand that we want the HIE to provide certain methods for patients, but there are other methods that are not included here that maybe weren't considered or that may come available that we would like to also be able to provide. One of those that I'd like to just kind of put on the table is many HIEs accept opt-outs via providers. So they're participants. Patients can actually opt out at a participant, and then that opt-out is transferred to the HIE. We think that would be an additional way to enable patient opt-out. And for those providers who wanted to provide that service to their patients, we would like to be able to honor that. And you could read these regs that we wouldn't be able to honor that we would have to actually then force the patient to go back to fill out a form and mail it to us or do something else.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Absolutely. Yes. We've had many.
I would just suggest we broaden them a little bit to provide additional options as available or as allowed so that it doesn't seem like we're being overly restrictive. And then I did want to just comment quickly, 6th grade reading level, I understand where we're going here, and we totally agree trying to make everything as comprehensive as possible for patients. But I will tell you with experience, being the person that did a lot of the patient education language at CRISP, getting reading levels is really difficult as soon as you start to talk about, as soon as you use the word health information and Privacy Portability Act, you will jump up and you can never get down to 6th grade reading level. And so there is a balance to be made about making sure that you're really transparent and accurate with patients that can be lost if you go too far down the reading level. So I would, while I understand the spirit, I would push that we would keep this at plain language and, not using jargon, et cetera. But reading comprehension is really tough and not necessarily best practice anymore when you talk to health literacy experts.
So you're saying that maybe we change this to say, but it's written using plain language.
Yes, that would be my suggestion.
Any concerns from anyone about doing that? I think that seems reasonable, seems doable. Again, we always check on any proposed changes during the review process. We'll come back to it. I need to think on plain language. Yeah, I understand. So let's keep moving, and we can always circle back here. Let's circle back if there's concerns or different thoughts that can inform one way or the other. Okay, Alana.
Okay, so number 5, when a consumer requests confirmation of a change in the patient's participation status, we've added some language under B to specify that the healthcare consumer will send confirmation of status change to the healthcare consumer via letter, via email, and again, API.
So we'll need to align these with the preceding sections using different approaches to voicing. Sally, is that a point you were going to make?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We'll come back to that. We'll note. And I think Luigi, do you want to, not everyone's on and can see comments. Do you want to state your comment for the group?
Well, just as we're talking about plain language, I just recognize that there is a Plain Language Act of 2010, which has, it says what it is, clear government communication that the public can understand and use. So plain language is a good term. I just wanted to put that in there just in case.
Okay, we'll also check that reference. Thank you. And I saw Kimberly's point, so that's a good one as well. Alana.
Okay, so section I.
David, can I Can I make one comment from before? We
Sure.
we need to take out the maybe in person and that C3 again. I don't totally understand what that meant either, how you can confirm in writing in person. Are you supposed to go to the person's house? I mean, but by telephone, if, so if the person opts out by telephone, then you have to provide them a written communication, and Romanet 3 says maybe in person or sent by mail, secure email or fax. I don't know what the maybe in person means. The written communication may be in person.
So point us to the citation reference again, or Ava highlighted if you see.
Yeah,
it.
it's up further. Sorry, it's up. It's back in the section that we were talking about with right here. So Romanet 3 here, if you read it, it says the written communication, and then you go down to 3, maybe in person or sent by mail, secure email, online portal, fax. I think we want to take out the maybe in person.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand that.
Right. So note that as a strike, Ava, and we'll come back to it. Yes, that gets back to where we have to do some cross alignment of the approaches. I think those are very good comments. Okay, Alana, back to you.
Okay, so section I, for a participating organization to comply with requirements regarding patient and healthcare consumer rights, we've struck oral notice from the participating organization to inform healthcare consumers at the first medical encounter following enrollment of the organization in an HIE. There was concern among commenters that this was overly burdensome.
Yeah. Anyone have angst about removing oral? I think the HIEs or the providers would say it's really a huge lift. Any concerns, Kimberly?
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of liked that when I saw it, because I think the written notice is usually buried in a lot of documents people sign, and most people have absolutely no idea that their information is being shared with an HIE. I mean, the consumers I talk to have no clue. So, I mean, I see opening a door to a conversation that providers may not want to have, but people don't have any idea their information is being shared.
And what you're saying is that it may be buried in the documentation.
Definitely.
So let's go to Pamela. But Pamela, before you begin, Dr. Lewis, I think you're still on. Could you, after Pamela makes a comment, could you weigh in here, please? Pamela.
So this one I'm really pretty passionate about. I think the challenge is that when you're in the medical encounter, there's so much going on. And obviously HIE communication and sharing of PHI is something that we have to hand out the NPP, and we have to communicate these things. If every regulation required that we verbally communicated to patients all the stuff that's important to communicate to them, we would never actually get to the medical encounter. So it's really hard to decide that your information going in an HIE is more important than the NPP that's written, or that you agree to, all the other things that you agree to when you, go to a medical provider. And I think this would be really, really challenging to operationalize.
So that's a good point, but I was wondering, is the balance is to make sure it's appropriately posted within the provider's office? Could that be a way of doing it? I think Kimberly's saying no.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge also, don't forget that this is an all participating provider. So you're thinking about the emergency department, you're thinking about like all sorts of different environments where patients are coming in for their first encounter. So if you're really obligating a full discussion about HIE with every patient when they first come into the hospital, I think you're really going to be very challenged.
And I can certainly appreciate that. I also wonder about the possibility of having it, and I'd have to go, honestly, I didn't look at this more closely to see what else is here, but if it could somehow be more standalone, I mean, I know.
So the challenge, I mean, Kim, I don't disagree with you, but like the Joint Commission has like 70 things that we have to educate our patients on. And if every single one of them had to be a standalone, then you'd get 55 pages of standalone documents when you came into You know, so the challenge is prioritizing all of the things that every regulatory agency thinks is the most important thing to educate your patients on. And so that's the challenge I think we constantly face with these kinds of issues. I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying I think that's why you end up with all this boilerplate language in documents no one reads, is because every CMS and Joint Commission, FDA, and HIPAA all have their own most important thing the consumer needs to know about when they come into the hospital or the provider's office. So it's just challenging, especially given the time constraints that providers have to sort of decide this one needs to be an oral discussion.
Yeah. So Dr. Lewis, are you, and then if you're able to comment, and then I think Luigi.
I think Pamela's points are really quite appropriate, David. I think it sort of comes back to some of Adrian's comments also, that the notion is to have something that's simple and informative and preferably brief, that describes what amounts to the best practice for the practice. It could be something as simple as we encourage you to enroll in it, but if you want to enroll in sharing your information because it helps us provide you better care. But if you're uncomfortable about doing it right on the spot with everything else going on, because not just the provider, but the patient is focused on the patient also. They're there for a reason generally. So I think that something that says, we think this is a good practice and will help us give you better care. We think you should opt in now, but if you'd like to think a little bit more about it, here's a little brochure and how to learn more about it before you decide, and then go on to the medical care. I think that over the years I've really been a very strong consumer advocate, and I think when I put that hat on, I still feel that brief and to the point with an option to think about it is really the best strategy.
So Craig brings to light. Thank you, Dr. Okay. We need to Dr. Lewis, so we've muted you for the moment because of the feedback. Craig brings to light legislation that passed last session regarding a consent management utility that the state designated HIE has to develop, and all HIEs operating in Maryland would connect to it. And Craig, do you want to share with the group your thoughts there?
Well, I think in many ways it's kind of an agreement with Kim that we all need to do better to better inform consumers. It just strikes me that there's going to be a much bigger conversation about that as we consider what does consent look like, within the context of a centralized HIE consent utility. And so perhaps we might want to wait for that discussion.
Yeah, because we would look at what regulations are needed for the consent management utility. So I think what you're saying, Craig, and others, is that this may be something to include in the notice or somehow related to the consent management utility. Kimberly, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, and maybe this isn't the time to brainstorm, but I certainly like the idea of sandboxing some brainstorming, because, and maybe, as Craig said, through those regulations. I mean, as more and more people opt, I mean, like, and to Dr. Lewis's point, I mean, if this were an opt-in model, that would be different, but it's an opt-out, right? I mean, people are in this whether they know it or not, and they don't know it. So as more and more people opt in to EHR portals, right? I mean, they get to opt into that. I'm thinking of ways where if you're opting into an EHR portal, you sort of, maybe then you're informed. And by the way, your information is being shared with an HIE, or perhaps having something on an EHR portal that says put your status of opted in or not opted in. I mean, some sort of way for people to know this, because it is an issue. We get a lot of complaints from consumers like, how did so-and-so know that? I didn't share that information, and trying to explain to people that their information is being shared. I mean, they're convinced HIPAA has been violated, and they're very troubled by it. So
So actually that's a good point. I mean, I think it's worth looking at when we get further downstream, because Pamela, to the point that was raised, as a provider, it probably would not be a concern to add language that talks about both the consent management utility, but also the points of participation in general. I think that's worth considering downstream. And I don't know if you're still there and your reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think David, that at Hopkins, we actually do have a standalone form, an education form. So we've sort of we've done that because we think it's important. I just worry about making it a regulatory requirement. We're happy to put, additional language. We're happy to put it additional places. I think it is an important piece, and consumer education is really important on this front. I worry about sort of the overwhelming of patients a little bit on everything they need to do when they come in for an encounter, and also sort of what's that balance.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So to Kimberly's recommendation, this makes for great sandboxing for downstream review and discussion. So consumer groups could provide some guidance on this. Yeah, and we would also look for consumer groups to help out here as well. So let's continue on. Alana.
Okay, so under this, we've included a requirement for this notice to the consumer to include the privacy and security measures that are in place to safeguard PHI, including authorization mechanisms and cybersecurity.
So I think we have to come back because we've changed to this. We have to cross-reference an earlier section because I believe we've expanded and changed the whole notion of safeguard. Is it PHII? Is it, we did this, I think that was our first thing we undertook this afternoon. So Eva, if you can make a point to note about balancing this with the first section that we've discussed today, that would be good. And then Dr. Connor, you had a comment. You're on mute.
Yeah. Curiosity thought or comment. When you all were working on the webpage earlier for the HIE, I thought that there was some education, some data or information about the HIE, what it was and how it was to be perceived or used. And I'm wondering, how does that, what's on your webpage, conflict with what we're saying now about how much we educate the general consumers? I've always contended that consumers definitely need to be aware of the HIE and the fact that their information is being shared. And how do we make sure that they get that, even when they come into the hospital, PCP, etc. What's even shared at that point to let them know, oh, by the way, this is what's going on, and your information is being transmitted somewhere. So I think that to have a focus group of some sort to look at this a little bit further would really reap some benefit to this conversation today.
Yeah, and we'll add a note here that there's a consumer education requirement in the regs, and maybe that's the place to, as Kimberly used artfully the notion of sandboxing, and looking at how we can modify that to cover some of the items that were discussed here. So Ava, if you can just pick that would be great. And then we'll continue moving forward. And Craig will pick up your comment as well. So Alana, back to you.
Okay, so there was an addition, section J, which commenters recommended we delete. There was some concern voiced in earlier meetings as well regarding HIEs being unable to update or modify PHI. The addition had read that an HIE and participating organization will implement policies and procedures to update PHI immediately after entry to ensure timely care for patients. So the recommendation was to not include that.
Yeah, I would, concerns, let me just ask Craig for his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this strikes me a little bit as unnecessary because kind of we're in the business of updating records when we get them. I think words like immediately after entry cause problems, like entry into the EHR, entry kind of once it's been transmitted to the HIE. And so, you know, I think we want and need records to be available quickly. I'm not sure there needs to be regulation about it.
Yeah, good point. Clay, your reaction?
Yeah, I think the intent was that when the HIE receives data, that without undue delay, they post it. I think that was really the intent.
Sally, thank you, Clay. Sally Ann? I mean, is it wordsmithing that we need here, or is it removal?
That's what I was sitting here pondering, whether I was, wordsmithing it. I just don't think that we need it. I think it's part of the participation agreement for participating organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's necessary for the HIE is what it does.
Okay. Pamela, your thoughts, and then let's go back to Clay after Pamela.
I genuinely don't understand it. And I don't know what kind of policies and procedures the participating organization would have to have in order to comply with this. It seems like it's getting pretty close to dictating like medical practice. I mean, again, like we're documenting in our EHR and then our EHR sends information directly to Chris, but I don't really understand the purpose. And I worry about requiring participating organizations to adopt policies and procedures on something like this, because that's really outside the scope of what we would normally do.
Yeah, so Kat, if Kat, I think wordsmithing is definitely needed. So let's see what others think. Thank you, Pamela. Kimberly, and then Clay.
I mean, my first instinct when I read it was this was sort of like adopting the information blocking, dealing with lab results and things like that, and getting posted immediately and not being withheld by providers, right? But I mean, which makes sense in the EHR setting. But hearing what everyone's saying here, I mean, and again, this is my sort of, I mean, is that data when it hits the EHR? Of course, it has to be, it needs, from an information blocking standpoint, it can't wait, right? So when it hits the EHR, it's pushed, right? I mean, so it felt very much like this is the wrong target. It made sense to me, but not for this group.
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
Having said that, does it have to be said that it is I mean, is it truly a simultaneous? I mean, do we need to say that that the push should be simultaneous? I mean, or is that? I mean, I don't know how we best say that. Like, obviously, you don't want something waiting days or weeks or months from being pushed. I mean, that's
yeah. I mean, this almost presumed that the HIE is storing information for a week. I mean, it's going live. I mean, the feeds are overnight or whatever the stream schedule is, but this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think that's true. Clay, any reaction?
I don't have a strong bias towards this, but I don't think it's objectionable to set an expectation that an HIE, without undue delay, processes the data they receive. I don't think that's a burden. I think it's just setting an expectation, whether it needs to be in here or not. I don't recall who said it, but if it's in the participating organizations, I think that's good from their perspective. I don't know if that is a consumer-facing protection, though, because that consumer isn't part of that agreement. Again, I also agree with all the comments. That's what HIEs do, and that's what they're trying to do, and that's their purpose. So I think it's in their best interest to do it as well.
So let's just get one more thought from, Catherine, can you weigh in here? I think we should visit this offline, but at the same time, I think I hear that it makes the intent, the spirit of it is good, but do we really need to put it in here? Because we're also trying to not just add content for the purpose of adding it. It's not to say that it doesn't have value, but I almost feel like this goes along the same route as some of the other things that we said. Yeah, it's nice to note, but probably not needed here.
Yeah.
Kath, what do you think?
Certainly, David. In fact, I was just getting ready to raise my hand. This feels like another consumer-facing perspective, attempting to put something here in writing that does point to information blocking and the fact, explicit call out that yes, this push would be immediate. So, I mean, I agree with Clay's comments and that it's not objectionable. I'd almost have to, again, look at all of this and find out, do we point to the information blocking like anywhere else? And it might be that this belongs elsewhere.
Yeah, and so why don't we capture that comment as well, Ava, because maybe it rolls up into to other things someplace else where the spirit. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, and we're at a good place because we're headed into 04. So let's do a wrap up and then talk about next steps. And so why don't I turn us back to Alana to talk about next steps and where we go in terms of how we proceed and then the next meeting.
Thanks, David. Yeah, we will we'll compile everyone's comments from this afternoon. We also plan to send out, so if you recall in September, we distributed the first 5 sections of the entire 12 sections of the regs and asked for some written comments back from everyone. So we'd like to do the same following this meeting. We plan to distribute the remainder of the sections, so 6 through 12 to the group and ask for written comment to those prior to our next meeting. The next meeting right now tentatively scheduled for January 10th, same time from 2:30 to 4:30. And I think that's it.
And to give you all some sort of framework here, what we'd like to do is ask you to consider this homework request, if you will. You would be looking at the changes that were proposed by the wonderfully talented people at Post and Shell, as well as changes that have been included by staff. And again, these are all draft. And if there's anything else you think you wish to comment on, that's fine too. Now, if no comments are equally as valid, that means you're comfortable, you're reasonably comfortable with what's there. Again, there's many bites at this apple, but we would like to be able to work through all the chapters, all the sections of this regulation, and have them, and that means the initial review, which is what we're doing with you all, and then one other circle back with the group here once we've tweaked them to see if there are any other changes, and then we want to present them back to our AEG and leadership at the commission, our executive director, to be able to say, okay, I think this is where we need to be at the moment, and then it goes back to all the industry for informal public comment, and before it's even proposed as a regulation. And sometimes we do 2 rounds of informal public comment. So all that in mind, we're aiming to try to get all this work completed by May, and so we can propose them. That is a very ambitious time frame, and it may not be doable, but if we come close to it, it's better than being way off the mark. So that's what we're working towards, and that the comments you all can share back with us will help speed the process up. The discussion we're having is excellent, and you all bring perspective that is so unique that you couldn't find it anywhere. So we very much appreciate that. And of course, it's balanced with availability as well from you all. But let's aim there. We'll get you the next section, and any help you can provide is certainly appreciated. And with that, I would just say, if we probably won't all have a chance to connect for the rest of the month. So for those of you who are partaking in various holidays between now and the end of the year, we hope you have an enjoyable time, and we certainly hope that everyone remains safe. Our executive director unfortunately wasn't able to pop in, but as always, he sends his best. And we look forward to communicating with you all again in the new year, or in the interim via email or whatever it takes. So with that, wish you all a great and happy new year, and look forward to talking to you as we get into the future. Take care, everyone. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Bye, David.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.